Guys, it's the moment we all have been waiting for. Today we're troubleshooting. Troubleshooting can be one of the most frustrating. Remember, these are French macarons, one of the most complicated and difficult desserts to create. It just takes practice and it's a visual learning experience. A lot of these issues can be solved preventatively, so let's get into our troubleshooting video. Lopsided macarons. Gosh, this is so dang frustrating because one side comes out perfectly and the other side hasn't risen at all. The good thing about this is that it has nothing to do with how you mixed your batter. There's a silver lining. The first reason is that you piped your macaroons at an angle instead of straight up and down. This can be resolved by practicing piping macaroons straight up and down by holding your elbows out instead of on an angle. The second reason is that your sheet pan is no good. If you have a faulty sheet pan, it doesn't distribute heat evenly, so you end up with one side rising and the other one not. Here are some of my favorite sheet pans that work every time. The third issue is that you're using a convection oven. Now, a convection oven has a fan feature in it, and if you don't know how to use this properly, the fan feature can be too intense and the pressure can cause your French macarons to rise unevenly during the baking process. Here's how to solve that problem. Turn the fan feature off and bake as usual. Cracked French macarons, the worst. I get it, the worst. Now, this is because of the resting period. Your French macarons have not rested long enough. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk out there that resting your French macarons is a myth. Unfortunately, it is not. If you are using the Italian meringue method or the Swiss meringue method, it takes less time to rest your French macarons because the egg proteins are cooked. In the French meringue method, the egg proteins are not cooked, so you absolutely have to rest your macarons with the recipe that I'm providing you today. Another issue why you have cracked macarons is that you've broken your batter or you've broken your meringue. If you've broken your batter or your meringue, they're never gonna set, no matter how long you rest them. They're just going to be very wet. Humidity can also be a factor in this, so don't beat yourself up. Sometimes you can do everything right, and if you're in a humid environment, they just are never going to set. Usually when it's a really humid day, I'll either not bake macarons, and I know that's not a solution for everyone, or I'll put a dehumidifier in my kitchen, or I'll let them rest under the vent fan. You want to make sure that your French macarons has a dull, hard, matte shell before you put them into the oven. Wrinkled French macarons. There's a bunch of different factors that can go into producing a wrinkled French macaron. One of them is that your temperature is too low. You're gonna have to increase your temperature 2 to 5 degrees and see if that helps. The second is that you've broken your meringue. The third is that you've either have almond flour that's too oily or you've added extracts or a liquid food coloring. Anything that's too oily or too watery is gonna cause these French macarons to bake wrinkly. Unless you are experienced with making French macarons, I would hold off on adding any extracts to your batter at this time until you start to nail the French macaron. If almond flour is the issue, I would just recommend finding another brand. I really swear by Bob's Red Mill finely ground almond flour. I've never had an issue with it being way too oily. Feet issues. No feet, thin feet, spread out feet. No feet or thin feet usually has to do with your meringue being under whipped or broken in your batter. No feet is usually an issue with meringue or your macaron batter. As you'll see, a lot of these issues normally trace back to how you're mixing your batter and how you're whipping your meringue. If this is a problem, it usually means that your meringue was not whipped far enough or you broke it while you were mixing the batter. Spread out feet, almost like an explosion. That means that your oven temperature is way too high. Bring it down 2 to 5 degrees. You're really gonna have to play with your time and temperature to find that sweet spot. When you now know what's causing this problem, you now know how to deal with it. Really explosively tall feet. That is usually an indication that your oven is also too high, so turn it down 2 to 5 degrees and play with that. Dry, overcooked, brown bottoms, or just a muddled color. Not only is the color just not where it's supposed to be, but I know for a fact that those shells are crispy or even really chewy. Here's how to avoid that. Your oven temp is way too high, bring it down 2 to 5 degrees, and I would also recommend double panning your sheet pans, putting one sheet pan on top of the other before you bake, and lining it with a non-stick silicone baking mat. If you're going to double your sheet pans, you can actually start by placing one of the sheet pans in the oven while it's preheating, and then taking your sheet pan with the piped macaron batters and putting it on top of it when you're ready to bake. Oven calibration is really important too, and if you're not able to do that, then I would recommend getting an oven thermometer so you can actually tell the true degrees of your oven. You just hang it in there, it preheats with your oven, and it will tell you the actual degrees. And you would be shocked how much of a difference 2 to 5 degrees can make when baking French macarons. Macarons that aren't smooth have points on them, or what they would call nipples. This is one thing and one thing only. You have undermixed your macaron batter. The good thing is you didn't break your meringue and you didn't break your macaron batter. All you have to do is carefully fold your batter for a little bit longer. I would rather have you undermix than overmix because undermix can be fixed. Also be sure that you have the proper brands of ingredients and that you sift the ingredients properly as well. Check out episodes 1 through 3 of the Macaron Files series where I go into depth about ingredients and the macaronage process. Hollow French macarons, the worst. Hollow macarons are usually an indication that you've overmixed your batter or broken your meringue. So just, again, be very careful when you're folding in your meringue to your dry ingredients, and also whip your meringue as far as it can go. You want to whip it to the point where when you try to stir it, it has a resistance to it. That's how you know that it's mixed perfectly. Different results from the same batch. If one of your sheet pans comes out perfectly, then you know it's not a macaronage issue. This usually indicates that you're not allowing each sheet pan to rest properly. Now, I can give you guys times, but the best thing to look for is when the macaron has rested properly. The macaron should be not shiny anymore. It should have like a matte, dough-like appearance, and it should feel like a hard crust on top. That's when you know you're ready to go. They're all ready to bake. And lastly, transitioning from parchment paper to a non-stick silicone baking mat. This can be really frustrating because you've used parchment paper for a long period of time and your macarons have come out perfectly. When you're transitioning from a thin sheet of parchment paper to a thicker material like a non-stick silicone mat, the heat's not going to hit the macaron as much as it did with the parchment paper. In order to fix this, just bake your French macarons for much longer. You have to play around with your time and temperature and find your sweet spot. If they're still not rising with a long amount of time, then up your temperature 2 to 5 degrees. This will help with them sticking to the silicone mat. This will help with the hollow macarons. This will help with them being wet inside the batter. It's all about baking them for a longer time and maybe increasing your heat. But I'm telling you, when you figure out how to use those non-stick silicone mats, it's life-changing. Knowing why things went wrong is going to be a monumental change for you guys. Now when you make French macarons, you're not going to be wasting as much time and as much money. You're going to know how to prevent these problems before they occur. It just takes a lot of practice and patience, and I'm here for you guys and I'm rooting for you guys. Next week, I'm giving you a bonus video on all of the equipment that I use.